Alexander the Great, Egypt, Siwa, and the Divine Alexander, 332–331 BC. Part 3, Chapter 1. A bloodless entry, the rare victory without battle. When Alexander the Great marches south after the fall of Gaza, he enters a land worn down by decades of foreign rule. Egypt has long endured Persian domination. Heavy taxation, distant governors, and religious neglect have drained the country's strength. The Persian satrap stands isolated. Military resistance is neither organized nor realistic. And so, something rare occurs in Alexander's campaign. Egypt submits without a fight, welcomed as a liberator. Alexander is not received as a conqueror. He is welcomed as a liberator. Temple gates are opened. Priests emerge to greet him with rituals that, for generations, have not been granted to foreign rulers. Ceremonies long reserved for legitimate kings are revived in his presence. This reception is not spontaneous enthusiasm alone. It is calculated relief, a moment of recognition. Alexander immediately understands the value of this moment. Politically, Egypt offers stability without resistance. Religiously, it offers legitimacy grounded in ancient tradition. Symbolically, it presents something far more powerful than submission, acceptance. Where cities in Asia resisted and were broken, Egypt embraces him. And that embrace carries weight. The war that carried Alexander to Egypt was fought with steel and fire. What awaits him here will be decided by belief. And soon, that belief will lead him far beyond politics, into the realm of the divine. Alexander the Great. Respect as an instrument of power. Part 3, Chapter 2. Unlike the Persian rulers before him, Alexander the Great treats Egypt's religious traditions with care. He honors the ancient cults. He offers sacrifice to the sacred Apis bull. He respects the authority of the priesthood and avoids every form of religious provocation. Where Persian kings had offended or neglected local gods, Alexander seeks proximity to them. This respect is not merely personal piety. It is calculated rule, religion as authority. In Egypt, religion is power. Legitimacy does not flow primarily from armies or decrees, but from recognition by the priesthood. A ruler acknowledged by the gods, and by those who speak for them, rules lawfully. Alexander understands this immediately. By honoring the temples, he secures the loyalty of those who shape belief, memory, and order. Control is achieved not through fear but through acceptance. The Pharaoh of two lands. Alexander allows himself to be depicted as Pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt. Whether a formal coronation ceremony took place remains debated among historians. What is not disputed is the evidence left behind. Egyptian temple inscriptions unmistakably name Alexander as the legitimate ruler of the land, placed within the traditional framework of pharaonic kingship. In stone and ritual, he becomes part of Egypt's royal continuity. Two identities, one authority. At this point, Alexander begins to carry two political identities. To the Greek and Macedonian world, he remains king and conqueror. To Egypt, he is pharaoh, chosen, sanctioned, and integrated into a tradition thousands of years old. These identities do not conflict. They reinforce one another. Alexandria, a city for eternity. On the Mediterranean coast, west of the Nile Delta, Alexander the Great makes a decision of lasting historical consequence. He founds a new city. Its name will be Alexandria, a perfect location. The chosen site is exceptional. It lies between sea and river, between the Mediterranean and the Nile, between Greece and Egypt, between east and west. Trade routes converge here, cultures intersect. Geography itself seems to invite permanence. Alexander recognizes this immediately. This is not a temporary base. It is a hinge between worlds, a vision, not a fortress. Ancient tradition holds that Alexander himself marked out the city's layout. Whether legend or reality, the story captures something essential. Alexandria is not conceived as a military stronghold. It is a project for the future. Unlike the cities he has taken by force, This one is created by intention. It is designed to endure beyond campaigns, beyond wars, beyond its founder's lifetime. A city with a purpose. Alexandria is meant to be more than an administrative center. It is envisioned as a meeting place of knowledge, commerce, and culture. Greek language and learning will coexist with Egyptian tradition. Merchants, scholars, sailors, and priests will share the same urban space. The city embodies Alexander's broader ambition, not merely to conquer territories, but to connect them, a symbol of a new age. In later centuries, Alexandria will become one of the greatest centers of science, trade, and scholarship in the ancient world. But even during Alexander's lifetime, it already stands as a symbol. It represents a new era, the deliberate fusion of Greek intellectual tradition with the civilizations of the East, a city born not from necessity but from vision, legacy in stone. With Alexandria, Alexander leaves something behind that no battle could achieve. Empires rise and fall, cities founded on vision endure. The city does not proclaim victory. It proclaims continuity. In Egypt, Alexander does not only rule, he creates. And as he turns from the Nile back toward the heart of Asia, he carries with him more than an army. He carries an idea of empire that will outlive him. The journey to Siwa, a dangerous detour. Part 3, Chapter 3. After months in Egypt, Alexander the Great makes an unusual decision. He chooses to travel to the Siwa oasis, a remote sanctuary deep in the western desert. There stands the oracle of Amun, a god the Greeks identify with Zeus. It is not a natural stop along any military route. It is a deliberate deviation, a path of risk. The journey is dangerous. Hundreds of kilometers must be crossed through open desert. There are no fixed roads, no reliable landmarks, no certainty of water. Sandstorms can erase direction in moments. Entire expeditions have vanished in this landscape. Alexander sets out regardless. He travels with only a small retinue, an illogical march. From a military perspective, the expedition makes no sense. No territory is gained, no enemy is confronted, no strategic position is secured. The journey weakens momentum and exposes the king to unnecessary risk. And yet, Alexander persists. A question of meaning. The purpose of the journey is not tactical. It is symbolic. At this stage of the campaign, Alexander does not need another victory. He already rules Egypt, controls the coast, and holds the initiative against Persia. What he seeks now is not confirmation of power, but of destiny. The oracle of Siwa does not answer questions of war. It answers questions of identity. Why Siwa matters. In the Egyptian worldview, Amun is not merely a god. He is the source of legitimate kingship. To be acknowledged by Amun is to be recognized not only as ruler, but as rightful ruler, chosen, sanctioned, and protected by divine order. Alexander understands this, and so he turns away from the Nile, from cities and armies, and marches into the desert, not to conquer, but to ask. The road to Siwa does not lead toward Persia. It leads inward, toward a question Alexander has never asked openly before, and an answer that will reshape how he understands himself. The oracle, truth or staged revelation? What exactly takes place inside the temple of Siwa oasis remains one of the great mysteries of antiquity. The conversation between Alexander the Great and the priests occurs behind closed doors, away from witnesses, ritualized and inaccessible to outsiders. No official record exists. Only interpretations remain. Ancient accounts. Ancient authors largely agree on one point. The high priest is said to have greeted Alexander as the, quote, son of Zeus. Whether this was a deliberate proclamation, a ritual formula, a mistranslation, or a carefully shaped performance cannot be determined with certainty. Some historians have suggested a linguistic misunderstanding, paidion instead of paidios. Others see a calculated gesture designed to flatter a powerful ruler. Still, others believe the moment reflected Alexander's own expectations. None of these explanations can be proven. Silence. and suggestion. Alexander himself never clarifies what was said. He does not publish the oracle's words. He does not deny the reports. He allows the ambiguity to stand. And it is precisely this silence that gives the episode its power. What Alexander does after Siwa matters more than what may have been spoken within the temple. A shift in self-presentation. From this point onward, Alexander begins to accept, openly or implicitly, the idea of divine descent. He does not insist upon it, but he no longer rejects it. The claim is allowed to circulate, to take root, to grow. Whether Alexander believes the oracle literally, symbolically, or politically remains uncertain. What is clear is that he understands its usefulness. Belief as authority. In the ancient world, divine lineage is not an abstract notion. It is a source of legitimacy. To be the son of a god is to stand above ordinary kingship, beyond conventional challenge. Alexander does not create this belief, but he learns how to inhabit it. The oracle does not crown him. It redefines him, a deliberate ambiguity. Truth and performance are no longer opposites here. They merge. Alexander leaves Siwa not with a written prophecy, but with something far more enduring, a narrative that cannot be disproven and therefore cannot be dismissed. From this moment on, Alexander is no longer judged solely by what he conquers. He is judged by who he is believed to be. The divine claim, a political necessity? Part 3, Chapter 4. For the Greek world, divine ancestry is unusual, but not inconceivable. Heroes like Heracles or Achilles already blur the line between human and divine. Kings, however, remain mortal. For Egypt, the situation is entirely different. Here, the pharaoh is divine by nature. 2 worlds, 1 ruler. Alexander understands the problem immediately. If he is to rule a world empire, military superiority alone will not suffice. Conquest can break resistance, but it cannot permanently unify cultures shaped by fundamentally different ideas of authority. What he requires is a form of legitimacy that transcends borders, a unifying concept. The claim to be the son of Zeus Amun fulfills this role precisely. To the Greeks, Zeus remains the highest god. To the Egyptians, Amun is the source of divine kingship. By merging the two, Alexander does not abandon one tradition in favor of another. He connects them beyond politics. This claim does more than justify rule. It elevates Alexander beyond conventional kingship. A ruler who is divinely descended is no longer merely opposed. He is questioned at a metaphysical level. Resistance becomes not only political rebellion, but defiance of cosmic order. Alexander does not need everyone to believe. He needs the idea to exist, a shield against challenge. In a vast empire composed of Greeks, Egyptians, Persians, and countless other peoples, divine legitimacy functions as a unifying abstraction. It places Alexander above local rivalries, dynastic claims, and cultural hierarchies. He becomes something no faction can fully challenge. Not just a king, but a figure of destiny, calculated acceptance. Whether Alexander personally believes in his divine origin is ultimately secondary. What matters is that he allows the claim to stand and understands its necessity. In doing so, he transforms belief into authority, and authority into permanence. Return to Memphis, a changed man. When Alexander the Great returns from Siwa to Memphis, he is no longer the same man who entered Egypt months earlier. His confidence has deepened. His demeanor has grown more distant. There is a new sense of detachment in his presence, an awareness of standing apart. The idea of his own exceptional nature has reached a new level, divinity and discipline. Yet Alexander does not lose his rationality. He organizes administration, appoints governors, secures tax revenues, and ensures stability throughout the region. Orders are given clearly, structures are reinforced. The machinery of rule functions without disruption. The God-King is not a dreamer. He remains a strategist, a king reforged. The return to Memphis marks a quiet but decisive transformation. Alexander has not abandoned reason for belief. He has integrated belief into reason. From this point onward, his actions will carry a new weight, not only strategic necessity, but perceived destiny. The man who leaves Egypt will still conquer, but he will do so convinced that he is fulfilling something far greater than himself. The Battle of Gaugamela, the decision for Asia, 331 BC. Part 3, Chapter 5. The Great King's Final Attempt. 2 years after Issus, one truth is undeniable. The war between Alexander the Great and the Persian great king Darius III can no longer be resolved through negotiation. The moment for compromise has passed, a kingdom at the brink. Darius understands the stakes. One more defeat will not merely weaken his position, it will shatter the Persian Empire itself. Authority, loyalty, and legitimacy are already strained. Satraps hesitate, allies waver, the image of invincibility has been broken. This battle must restore it, or end it. The gathering of an empire. Darius mobilizes everything Persia can still command. Troops are drawn from across the empire, from the Iranian plateau to Mesopotamia, from the eastern satrapies to the western heartlands. Cavalry, infantry, allies, levies, and elite guards assemble for a single decisive confrontation. This is not a field army. It is an empire in arms, choosing the ground. The battlefield is carefully selected near Gaugamela. Wide, flat, prepared. The terrain favors numbers, cavalry, and mobility. The ground is cleared to allow chariots full freedom of movement. Everything is designed to neutralize Alexander's tactical advantages and bring Persia's superior scale to bear. Darius will not be surprised again. One last chance. For Persia, Gaugamela is not merely a battle. It is the last chance to reclaim authority, to reassert the natural order of king and subject, ruler and ruled. If Darius prevails here, Alexander becomes an audacious invader defeated at the edge of empire. If he fails, Persia ceases to be a great power. The weight of destiny. Alexander advances eastward, knowing exactly what awaits him. This will not be another Issus, not another Tyre, not another Gaza. There will be no retreat afterward, no second army, no delay. At Gaugamela, the future of Asia will be decided in a single day. Two kings now move toward one another. One fights to preserve a world that already exists. The other believes himself chosen to replace it. At Gaugamela, only one vision can survive. An army for the final decision. Part 3, Chapter 6. The preparations on the Persian side are immense. Darius III draws forces from across the entire empire. Cavalry arrives from Media and Bactria. Infantry is raised in Mesopotamia. Units march in from the Iranian heartlands. Mercenaries from distant regions swell the ranks. Never before has Persia assembled such a concentration of power for a single battle. Weapons of shock. For the first time, Darius places systematic emphasis on scythed chariots, war carts fitted with blades designed to tear through dense infantry formations and rip open entire lines. Even war elephants are brought forward, though only in limited numbers. Their presence alone is meant to intimidate, to overwhelm, to remind the enemy of the empire's vast resources. This army is built not for maneuver. It is built to crush, preparing the ground. Darius does not leave victory to chance. Near Gaugamela, close to Arbela, the battlefield itself is prepared. The plain is leveled. Stones are removed. Irregularities are smoothed out. The land is reshaped to serve the army. Everything is calculated, a battlefield of numbers. The wide open terrain is chosen for a single purpose, to allow the full deployment of Persian superiority in numbers, cavalry, and shock weapons. Here, Alexander's tactical ingenuity is meant to be overwhelmed by scale. Mobility will counter discipline. Mass will counter precision. Darius intends to fight not with finesse, but with inevitability. An empire's last argument. This army represents more than military strength. It is Persia's final argument against replacement, a declaration that the old order will not vanish quietly, that tradition, hierarchy, and imperial scale still matter. At Gaugamela, Persia does not seek a clever victory. It seeks a definitive one. Across the plain, Alexander advances with a force far smaller, but honed, disciplined, and commanded by a man convinced of destiny. Numbers will face precision. Tradition will face innovation. An empire will face a vision. The stage is set. Alexander understands the risk. Alexander the Great advances north from Egypt and Phoenicia toward the heart of Mesopotamia. His army is numerically inferior, significantly so. Against the mass gathering under Darius III, Alexander commands only a fraction of the men. What he lacks in numbers, however, he compensates with discipline, cohesion, and experience. This is an army shaped by years of continuous campaigning. Its soldiers have marched, fought, and survived together. They know their formations, trust their officers, and understand Alexander's way of war. Calm before the decisive day. On the night before the battle, Alexander sleeps. Ancient authors repeatedly emphasize this detail, not as anecdote, but as statement. While others remain awake, tense, and restless, Alexander rests calmly. It is not indifference. It is confidence. No place for chance. Alexander knows what awaits him. He understands the danger of the open plain, the threat posed by Persian cavalry, the scythed chariots, the sheer scale of the enemy army. But he also knows that the outcome will not be decided by fortune, not by numbers alone, not by fear, not by improvisation, preparation over anxiety. Every movement has been considered, every formation planned. Alexander has already fought Darius before and defeated him. He has studied Persian strengths and weaknesses. He trusts his men, and they trust him. The calm of this night is not arrogance. It is preparation completed, a commander certain of his method. Alexander does not believe victory is guaranteed, but he believes it is possible, and that belief rests on method, not hope. The battle to come will be won or lost through execution, timing, and resolve. Chance will play its role, but it will not decide the day. As dawn approaches, two armies prepare to face one another. One relies on mass and magnitude, the other on discipline and design. Alexander rises rested. He knows the danger, and he knows exactly how he intends to face it. Deployment of the armies. Two worlds collide. Part 3, Chapter 7. As the armies face one another near Gaugamela, the contrast could not be sharper. This is not merely a confrontation of forces. It is a confrontation of military philosophies. Alexander's formation, flexibility over depth. Alexander the Great deploys his army in an unusually wide formation. He deliberately avoids excessive depth. Instead of solidity, he prioritizes movement. At the center stands the Macedonian phalanx, compact and disciplined. On the right flank, the companion cavalry, under Alexander's personal command. On the left flank, cavalry and infantry led by Parmenion. Behind the main line, reserve units, a significant innovation, used here systematically for the first time. This arrangement is not defensive. It is adaptive. Alexander prepares not only to strike, but to respond. Darius, deployment, power on display. Across the plain, Darius III presents a very different picture. The center is held by heavy infantry and the royal guard. Cavalry masses on both flanks. Scythed chariots are positioned in front of the line, ready to tear through enemy formations. Darius himself stands elevated on his chariot, clearly visible to all. The Persian formation is vast, imposing, and visually overwhelming. It is designed to intimidate and to crush through sheer force, impressive yet rigid. The Persian deployment radiates power, but it lacks elasticity. Its strength lies in magnitude, not maneuver. Once set in motion, it will be difficult to adjust. Command relies on visibility and presence, not on rapid coordination. Alexander's army, by contrast, is built to move within the battle, to exploit openings, respond to threats, and shift weight where needed. Two concepts of war. At Gaugamela, two worlds stand opposed. One believes victory comes from scale and dominance. The other believes it comes from control and timing. The formations are complete. The lines are drawn. What follows will determine not only the outcome of a battle, but which vision of warfare will shape the future of empires. The opening: patience instead of assault. Alexander the Great does not attack immediately. There is no sudden charge. No rush toward the Persian center. Instead, he moves his army diagonally to the right, away from the point where the enemy expects the blow. It is a deliberate, measured advance, a calculated provocation. The maneuver is subtle, but its implications are dangerous. If Alexander continues this movement, he threatens to outflank the Persian line entirely. The vast formation, assembled by Darius III, risks being stretched, turned, and rendered ineffective. Darius sees the danger, and he reacts. The fatal adjustment. To counter Alexander's movement, Darius orders parts of his cavalry to follow, to mirror the Macedonian shift and prevent encirclement. It appears sensible. It appears necessary. But it is the decisive mistake. A gap opens. As Persian cavalry is pulled away from its original position, the cohesion of the center begins to loosen. Small gaps appear. Coordination weakens. The rigid formation loses its integrity. The Persian line is no longer a single, unified front. It is beginning to stretch, waiting for the moment. Alexander does not accelerate. He does not strike prematurely. This is the moment he has been creating, not through force, but through movement. The enemy has done exactly what he anticipated. The gap is not yet large, but it is enough. Alexander waits. And when he moves next, it will not be to threaten. It will be to decide. The first phase of the battle ends without a clash of arms. But the battle has already turned. One king has reacted, the other has orchestrated. What follows will happen quickly. The chariots, calculated terror. The Persian chariots advance. Blades flash at their axles. Dust rises across the plain. They are meant to terrify, to tear open infantry lines and break cohesion through shock alone. But Alexander the Great has prepared for this moment. Anticipation, not surprise. Light infantry moves forward. At the last possible moment, controlled gaps open within the Macedonian phalanx. The chariots rush through, finding no mass to destroy, no formation to shatter. What was designed to cause chaos passes harmlessly between disciplined ranks, neutralized behind the lines. Once through the formation, the chariots lose momentum. They are isolated, surrounded, disabled. Drivers are cut down. Horses are stopped or turned. What was meant to be a weapon of fear becomes a liability. The shock weapon fails. A weapon without effect. The psychological impact the Persians had hoped for never materializes. There is no panic, no collapse, no disorder. Alexander's men hold formation. The line remains intact. The battlefield does not erupt into confusion. It settles into clarity, a turning point without noise. The failure of the chariots is decisive, precisely because it is unspectacular. A key element of the Persian battle plan has been removed, not through brute force, but through anticipation and discipline. Another advantage disappears. The Persian front has been stretched. The chariots have failed. The gap in the center remains. Now Alexander moves. And this time, he does not wait. The decisive breakthrough. Alexander the Great recognizes the opening in the Persian center. It is narrow, it is temporary, and it is enough. Without hesitation, he reforms the companion cavalry into a wedge formation and drives forward with full force, straight toward Darius III. Precision over mass. This is not a broad assault. There is no attempt to overwhelm the entire front. It is a concentrated strike, focused, disciplined, and calculated to penetrate at the weakest point. Alexander aims not at the army, but at its command. The wedge cuts forward, impact at the center. The Persian line begins to falter. Units hesitate. Coordination breaks down. What had already been stretched now starts to tear. The center, once massive and imposing, loses cohesion under the sudden pressure. Alexander's charge does not merely advance. It destabilizes a battle within the battle. As the companion cavalry surges ahead, the fight narrows to a critical corridor. Everything else, the flanks, the numbers, the scale, momentarily fades. What matters now is speed, direction, and nerve. Alexander is no longer maneuvering. He is striking for decision. The threshold crossed. With this charge, the balance of the battle shifts irreversibly. The Persian front no longer holds as a unified force. Control begins to slip, and at the heart of the storm stands the great king himself. The moment of choice has arrived. The wedge is moving. The center is breaking. All eyes turn toward one man. What happens next will not be decided by formations, but by resolve. The second flight of the great king. Part 3, Chapter 8. As it issues before, Darius III sees the battle closing in around him. Once again, the fighting approaches his immediate position. Once again, the Macedonian advance threatens not merely his army, but his person. And once again, Darius chooses to flee. A decision repeated. The decision is not forced by total collapse. On the Persian left flank, the cavalry continues to press hard against Parmenion. The battle there is still contested. The outcome is not yet decided everywhere. Yet the great king turns his chariot away from the field. For the second time, the moral breaking point. This moment seals the fate of the Persian army. In the ancient world, the king is more than a commander. He is the axis of order, legitimacy, and protection. When he remains, cohesion holds. When he flees, meaning collapses. Darius, departure is not merely tactical. It is existential. From battle to disintegration, news of the king's flight spreads rapidly. Units falter. Command dissolves. Resistance turns into retreat. What had been a massive, organized host begins to fragment, not because it is defeated everywhere, but because it has lost its center, a pattern completed. This is not an isolated incident. It is repetition. At Issus, Darius fled and survived the loss of authority. At Gaugamela, he flees again, and with this second flight, the illusion of Persian recovery is destroyed. The empire can no longer claim inevitability. The end of confidence. For the Persian soldiers, the message is unmistakable. Their king has abandoned the field once more. And with that, the moral order of the army collapses beyond repair. The battle is no longer about tactics. It is about belief. And that belief has now shattered. The great king is gone. The center has broken. What remains is pursuit, destruction, and consequence. Gaugamela is no longer a contest. It is a verdict, victory under threat. In the aftermath of the breakthrough, Alexander the Great faces a critical decision. Ahead of him, Darius III is fleeing eastward. A rapid pursuit could end the war immediately. The capture of the great king would mean final, unquestionable victory. But elsewhere on the battlefield, danger remains. A choice of responsibility. On the left flank, Parmenion is under severe pressure. Persian cavalry continues to fight, threatening to break through and endanger the Macedonian rear. Alexander must choose. Personal triumph or the safety of his army. He chooses the army. Securing the battle, Alexander turns back. He leads his forces to stabilize the left flank, drives back the remaining Persian resistance, and ensures that the battlefield is fully secured. The decision prevents catastrophe and transforms momentum into certainty. The victory is preserved. The cost of restraint. Darius escapes. The chance to capture the great king is lost. The war will not end that day with a single arrest. Instead, it will conclude through consequence and collapse. Yet the price of restraint is measured and acceptable. An empire in name only. Though Darius lives, his power does not. After Gaugamela, the Persian Empire exists largely on paper. Its armies are shattered. Its authority is broken. Satraps will no longer fight for a king who has fled twice. Alexander has not seized the man. He has seized the world. Victory defined. Gaugamela is not remembered for a dramatic capture. It is remembered for something greater. Alexander proves that he is not driven by impulse, pride, or personal glory. When forced to choose, he protects his army over his ambition. That decision secures the victory. And it confirms his mastery, not only of war, but of command. The battlefield falls silent. Asia lies open. The great king is alive, but the empire he ruled has ceased to exist. What follows now is not another battle. It is the takeover of a world. After Gaugamela, the end of an empire. Part 3, Chapter 9. After the Battle of Gaugamela, the collapse accelerates. One by one, the great cities of the Persian world fall into Alexander the Great's hands. Babylon opens its gates. Susa follows. And finally, Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire. There is no coordinated resistance. The war is over in all but name. Authority without defense. These cities are not taken through prolonged sieges or decisive battles. They fall because the Persian system has lost its center. Without a king who can command loyalty, armies dissolve into local interests. Governors submit, garrisons stand aside. The mechanisms of empire cease to function. Alexander does not conquer Persia step by step. Persia collapses into him, the fate of Darius. Darius III flees eastward, stripped of authority and protection. No longer defended by armies or honored by satraps, he becomes a liability rather than a ruler. Eventually, he is murdered by his own followers, satraps who seek to save themselves by removing a king without power. Darius dies not as a reigning monarch, but as a king without a kingdom, the end of an order. With the death of Darius, the Achaemenid Empire effectively ends, not because its lands are entirely occupied, but because its legitimacy has vanished. The empire does not fall to a final blow. It dissolves. A world replaced. Alexander now stands as the unchallenged master of the Persian heartlands. The old imperial structure is gone. In its place emerges something new, an empire not inherited but created through conquest, strategy, and belief. Asia no longer has a great king. It has a new ruler. Conclusion. Gaugamela decides the war. What follows confirms its verdict. An empire that once stretched across continents ends not with a final stand, but with abandonment, betrayal, and silence. The Persian world has fallen. And Alexander now inherits the task that victory always brings. Not to conquer, but to rule. The significance of Gaugamela. Gaugamela is more than a battle. It is a turning point in world history. No equal opponent remains. After Gaugamela, no power exists that can challenge Alexander on equal terms. There are still distances to cross, cities to secure, regions to integrate. But there is no rival empire left that can oppose him as Persia once did. The age of symmetrical conflict is over, a ruler between two worlds, power, loyalty, and fracture lines, 330 minus 327 BC. Part 3, Chapter 10. After victory, an empire that must be governed. With the collapse of the Persian power center, Alexander the Great faces a new challenge. The great battles have been won, but the empire is far from settled. Conquest is not control. From Babylon to Susa, from Persepolis to the eastern satrapies, administration, taxation, law, and religion vary dramatically. This is not a unified state. It is a mosaic. Violence alone cannot hold such a structure together, not for long. Alexander understands this, a risky choice. Rather than ruling through permanent repression, Alexander chooses a dangerous alternative: integration instead of simple subjugation. He retains Persian satraps in their positions. He adopts existing administrative systems. He appears in courtly splendor, surrounded by Persian ritual, dress, and ceremony. To the conquered populations, this signals continuity. To many Macedonians, it signals betrayal. Two audiences, one king. Alexander now rules two worlds at once. To the peoples of Asia, he presents himself as successor, not destroyer, of Persian kingship. Order is preserved, traditions are respected, authority appears familiar. To his Macedonian companions, however, this transformation is unsettling. They had followed a king who led from the front, who shared hardship, who lived as one of them. Now they see a ruler adopting foreign customs, elevating former enemies, and reshaping the meaning of victory. The first cracks. What Alexander sees as pragmatic governance, many Macedonians perceive as abandonment. The distance between king and companions begins to grow, not suddenly, but steadily. Loyalty remains, but it is no longer unquestioned. Admiration gives way to unease. The empire is secure. The cohesion of its ruling elite is not. A new phase begins. The campaign has entered a different stage. Alexander no longer fights primarily against external enemies. He now faces internal tension between cultures, between expectations, and between identities. He stands between two worlds, and the strain of holding them together will soon make itself felt. The Persian mask, strategy or self-transformation. Gradually, Alexander the Great begins to change the way he presents himself. He adopts Persian clothing. He embraces court ceremony. He assumes titles unfamiliar to the Greek and Macedonian world. To the peoples of Asia, these gestures are reassuring. They signal continuity, legitimacy, and royal dignity. Alexander does not appear as a foreign conqueror, but as a rightful successor. The question of proskynesis. Nothing, however, provokes greater controversy than proskynesis, the ritual act of bowing or prostration before the ruler. In the Persian world, this gesture expresses loyalty and recognition of authority. It is political, not theological. For Greeks and Macedonians, the meaning is entirely different. To kneel before a man is an act reserved for the gods. Alexander's intention. Alexander understands the ritual as an instrument of rule. Proskynesis binds Eastern elites to his person. It elevates his authority above tribal, ethnic, and regional divisions. It transforms obedience into ritualized loyalty and places the king at the symbolic center of the empire. From Alexander's perspective, this is not vanity. It is governance, a growing distance. Among the Macedonians, however, the interpretation is starkly different. They do not see integration. They see alienation. The king who once shared their hardships now demands gestures they associate with divine worship. The line between ruler and companion, once thin, begins to harden. Alexander may be wearing a political mask, but to his followers, it feels increasingly like a transformation. Perception versus purpose. What Alexander intends as strategy is experienced by others as estrangement. The issue is no longer simply ritual. It is identity. Is Alexander still one of them, or has he become something else? A question without an answer. Whether Alexander is consciously performing a role or genuinely reshaping himself remains impossible to determine. Perhaps it is both. What matters is not what Alexander believes he is doing, but how his actions are received. And that reception will soon have consequences. Old companions, new doubts. As Alexander the Great moves further away from the familiar Macedonian way of life, discontent grows among his companions. These are men who have fought at his side for years. Men who endured hunger, wounds, and exhaustion alongside him. They had followed Alexander for glory, honor, and shared hardship, not for court ritual and foreign etiquette. The conflict remains mostly unspoken, but it is unmistakable. From brotherhood to obligation, Alexander does not respond with reassurance. He responds with distance. What was once loyalty born of camaraderie slowly becomes loyalty demanded by position. The king no longer stands among equals. He stands above them. The bond that once defined his leadership begins to fray. Philotas. The break in a single night chapter. The tension reaches its breaking point during a banquet. Philotas the Black, the man who once saved Alexander's life at the Battle of the Granicus, speaks openly. Fueled by wine, he criticizes the new customs, the Persian influence, and the direction Alexander has taken. He praises Philip II of Macedon. He questions Alexander's achievements. He mocks the transformation of the king. Words sharpen. Pride collides with resentment. A moment lost. Alexander loses control. In a sudden outburst, he seizes a spear and strikes. Cletus is killed. The room falls silent. Shock and irreversibility. The act stuns everyone present. The army is shaken. The court is horrified. And Alexander himself is devastated. This is not a calculated execution. It is not political necessity. It is a moment of rage, and it cannot be undone. A line crossed. With the death of Cletus, something fundamental changes. Alexander has not merely killed a man. He has killed a symbol of shared struggle, of old loyalty, of the Macedonian past. From this point forward, the distance between king and companions is no longer abstract. It is real, and it is irreversible. Remorse without return. Part 3, Chapter 11. Once the rage subsides, it is followed by deep remorse. Ancient sources report that Alexander the Great mourns for days. He weeps, withdraws, and curses himself for what he has done. The death of Cletus marks a moment of painful clarity. Alexander understands that his power now demands irreversible sacrifices. This is no longer the cost of war. It is the cost of rule, awareness without reversal. Yet Alexander does not turn back. There is no return to the earlier bond between king and companions, no restoration of the old equality forged in battle and shared hardship. Instead, something else happens. Alexander retreats inward, the loneliness of power. From this point on, decisions become more isolated, authority grows more formal, criticism becomes dangerous, not because Alexander seeks to silence it, but because he can no longer tolerate it. The ruler distances himself from his men, not through cruelty, but through separation, a changed king. The guilt remains, but it does not soften him. It hardens him. Alexander continues forward, more controlled, more guarded, and more alone than ever before. The man who once relied on trust now relies on command. The king endures. The companion disappears. A quiet transformation. The death of Cletus does not end Alexander's campaign. It changes its character. From this moment on, power is no longer shared. It is born, and it weighs heavily on the man who carries it. Parmenion and Philotas. Loyalty under suspicion. Part 3, Chapter 12. Shortly after the death of Cletus, the army is shaken by another crisis. A conspiracy is uncovered, or at least alleged. Philotas, son of the highly respected commander Parmenion, is accused of having concealed a plot against Alexander the Great. The charge is not that Philotas planned the assassination, only that he failed to report it. Evidence and pressure. The evidence is thin. Testimonies are contradictory. Motives remain unclear, but the pressure is immense. Philotas holds one of the highest commands in the army. His father controls vast forces and enormous resources in the eastern provinces. If doubt exists, it cannot be allowed to linger. Alexander chooses certainty over hesitation, judgment by fear. Philotas is arrested. He is tortured. He confesses. He is condemned. Soon after, he is executed. Whether the confession reflects truth or survival is impossible to determine. In the logic of absolute power, the distinction no longer matters. Suspicion alone is sufficient. The death of Parmenion. Alexander now faces a second decision, more severe than the first. Parmenion is far away, commanding troops and guarding royal treasuries. He is powerful, respected, and potentially dangerous. If Philotas was guilty, Parmenion might seek revenge. If Philotas was innocent, Parmenion might rebel. Alexander does not wait. Without trial, without hearing, Parmenion is killed on royal orders. Security over legacy. It is a decision driven by security. And it ends an era. Parmenion had served both Philip II of Macedon and Alexander. He was one of the architects of Macedonian power. His death severs the last direct link to the old generation. From this point on, no one stands beside Alexander with comparable authority. A kingdom of one. The executions remove a potential threat. They also remove trust. Fear replaces loyalty. Obedience replaces counsel. Silence replaces debate. Alexander is now undisputed and profoundly alone, meaning what appears as ruthless necessity is also a point of no return. Alexander no longer rules among companions. He rules above them. The empire is secure, but it is no longer shared. A new army for a new empire. Part 3, Chapter 13. Alexander the Great understands that he cannot rely on the Macedonians alone forever. The empire has grown too vast. The distances are too great. The demands of rule too complex. Alexander begins to integrate Persians and Bactrians into his army. They are trained in Macedonian tactics, organized into familiar formations, and placed in positions of responsibility. This is not an experiment. It is a structural decision, logic of empire. From Alexander's perspective, the step is unavoidable. A world empire cannot be defended by a single people. A universal rule requires universal participation. The army must reflect the realm it protects. What once was a Macedonian force becomes something new, multi-ethnic, adaptive, imperial. Perception of betrayal. Among many Macedonians, the reaction is fierce. They do not see necessity. They see replacement. Men who once believed themselves the core of Alexander's power now feel interchangeable. The privileges earned through years of bloodshed appear diluted by newcomers who did not share the original hardships. To them, this is not reform. It is betrayal, an irreversible shift. Alexander does not reverse course. He does not argue. He does not justify himself. The transformation continues. The army is no longer bound primarily by shared origin, but by loyalty to the king alone. The loneliness of power. During these years, Alexander the Great changes perceptibly. The young king, who once fought side by side with his companions, becomes an untouchable monarch. Closeness grows rare. Distance becomes the norm. He remains strategically brilliant, decisive, and fearless. But as a human being, he becomes increasingly unreachable. The loneliness of power is not accidental. It is structural, and it will shape every decision that follows, especially as Alexander moves ever farther east, toward limits no conqueror has yet crossed. An empire without rest. As Alexander the Great pushes farther east, the empire continues to grow. But so do its tensions. Loyalty is no longer assumed. It is enforced. Admiration increasingly mingles with fear. The structures of power hold, but they strain. Expansion without stability. The realm stretches across continents, cultures, and traditions. Order is maintained, but peace remains elusive. The further Alexander advances, the harder it becomes to keep what lies behind him unified. Victory no longer brings resolution. It brings responsibility and pressure. A new direction. The march continues toward India. But the greatest challenge Alexander now faces is no longer a rival king or a hostile empire. Darius is gone. Persia is broken. What remains is something far more difficult to overcome, the final adversary. Alexander's greatest opponent is no longer an enemy across the battlefield. It is the limit of his own power. And the question of how far a man and an empire can go before both begin to break.